Something extraordinary happened on a combat mission over Iran. A United States F-35, the most advanced fighter jet on Earth, a stealth aircraft costing over $100 million per unit, made an emergency landing after returning from active operations. The Pentagon said almost nothing officially, but Al Jazeera confirmed it. CENTCOM issued a statement, and within hours, a video surfaced that Iranian state media claimed showed the moment a U.S. F-35 was struck. Now here's what makes that incident the key that unlocks everything else happening right now. Because that single event, one aircraft, one mission, one emergency landing, is directly connected to a $200 billion funding request. It is connected to a deepening intelligence dispute between Washington and Jerusalem. It is connected to 13 American military deaths. And it is connected to a war machine on the Iranian side that is still building, still firing, and still expanding. This is despite 3 weeks of sustained bombardment by the most powerful military coalition on Earth. Stay with me. This is the story the daily headlines are not fully telling you. Every fact in this video is verified. Every number comes from primary sources. And by the end, you'll understand something about the durability and structure of Iran's military apparatus that changes how you read everything else coming out of this conflict. Let's start with what we actually know about American losses, because the human cost of this conflict is the foundation everything else rests on. According to the official CENTCOM public releases on the U.S. Central Command website, the United States lost a KC-135 refueling aircraft over Iraq while supporting operations against Iran. The loss occurred on March 12, 2026. Initial reporting confirmed 4 crew members deceased. A subsequent CENTCOM statement on March 14th confirmed all crew members aboard that aircraft were killed. The Associated Press confirmed 6 crew members died in that KC-135 loss. These were servicemen and women who were not flying strike missions, but were supporting the broader operational architecture. They were performing the unglamorous but essential work of keeping fighter jets in the air long enough to complete their objectives. President Trump traveled to Dover Air Force Base on March 18th for the dignified transfer. This is the solemn ceremony where fallen service members return home for the last time. AP photographed him arriving with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane, and members of Congress. That image tells you something critical. This was not a routine public relations appearance. When the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Defense Secretary both accompany the President, it signals that the chain of command is treating these losses with gravity. And it signals that the losses are significant enough to demand that visible gravity. Al Jazeera's live conflict tracker puts the total U.S. military death toll in this conflict at 13 soldiers as of March 20th, 2026. Additionally, the same tracker records preliminary figures of over 1,144 deaths in Iran, at least 18 deaths in Israel, and 21 people killed in Gulf states. These are preliminary numbers. In active conflicts of this nature, preliminary numbers are always revised upward. Also confirmed by CENTCOM's own public releases, 3 U.S. F-15 aircraft were involved in a friendly fire incident in Kuwait on March 2nd, 2026. The pilots were reported safe. That incident received almost no mainstream coverage, but it tells you something important about the operational tempo and complexity of managing a multi-theater air campaign at this scale. Friendly fire incidents are tragedies, but they are also indicators of operational pressure. They show how many sorties are being flown, how quickly, and over how complex a battle space. Now, let's talk about the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, because this is the institution that most coverage reduces to a simple label without examining what it actually is. Understanding this distinction is essential to understanding why this conflict is not following the trajectory that early strike planning may have anticipated. The IRGC is not a conventional military. A conventional military has a command hierarchy, fixed bases, centralized logistics, and predictable supply chains. Degrade those nodes sufficiently, and the conventional military's ability to project force collapses relatively quickly. This is the model that worked in the Gulf War of 1991. It worked because Iraq's military was organized conventionally. Strike the command centers, destroy the logistics, and the army in the field loses cohesion. The IRGC was explicitly designed to survive exactly the kind of campaign being waged against it right now. It was designed by people who studied what happened to conventional militaries when they faced overwhelming American air power. It operates through a decentralized network of units with significant operational autonomy. It maintains underground and dispersed missile production facilities. This fact has been publicly documented by Western intelligence assessments for years. It has parallel command structures that can function even if upper echelons are degraded. And critically, it has spent the past 2 decades dispersing its most important capabilities into hardened, buried facilities. These facilities are deliberately separated so that no single strike package can neutralize the capability all at once. Al Jazeera reported on March 20th that Iran is proving masterful at adaptation. That is not commentary. It is a description of an observed behavior. It is an organization changing its operational patterns faster than targeting cycles can keep up with. The New York Times reported on March 20th that the United States and Israel are starting to show their different priorities in Iran. This matters enormously for understanding the IRGC's continued functionality. The U.S. priority has been focused on preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons and on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The Israeli priority has been more focused on degrading Iran's ability to project force toward Israel directly. This involves targeting missile systems, command structures, and leadership. Those are not the same objective. They require different targeting decisions. And when two partners have different primary objectives, the targeting process becomes a negotiation. This means neither objective is being pursued with the single-minded focus it would receive if one nation were acting alone. The IRGC benefits from this division. Here is the specific evidence that the IRGC's missile capability remains active and operational. Iran struck Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial complex. This is confirmed by Bloomberg, Reuters, and multiple Gulf state governments. Qatar's government confirmed that Iranian strikes damaged approximately 17% of its LNG production capacity. The damage is severe enough that Reuters cited recovery timelines of 3 to 5 years. To reach Ras Laffan with this level of precision, Iran had to plan and execute a complex strike mission against a target outside its borders. They did this through airspace that is actively contested. And they did this while simultaneously managing ongoing defensive operations against U.S. and Israeli strike packages inside Iran itself. That is not the behavior of a military organization whose back is broken. Iran struck Kuwait's oil refinery, according to Al Jazeera's reporting. Iran struck targets in Lebanon through proxies and allied forces. Israeli air raids in southern Lebanon caused dozens of casualties, according to Al Jazeera's live coverage. Iran struck what it described as targets in response to the Israeli attack on South Pars. Simultaneously, Iran has maintained its maritime disruption campaign in the Persian Gulf. Bloomberg described this in a detailed explainer as an effective partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz. They are using drones, naval harassment, and electronic warfare, including signal jamming. The New York Times reported on March 20th that U.S. warplanes and attack helicopters are actively hitting Iranian targets in an effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That sentence, read carefully, tells you that as of March 20th, the Strait of Hormuz has not yet been reopened. The campaign to reopen it is ongoing, which means Iran's capacity to threaten it has not been eliminated. This is the core of what is happening with the IRGC's war machine. The organization was built for exactly this kind of sustained punishment. It was built to absorb strikes, disperse, adapt, and continue functioning. Every day it continues to fire missiles and disrupt shipping is a day it demonstrates that it has not been defeated. Al Jazeera reported that Iran's leadership issued a no-ruse message, stating that the enemy has been defeated in its aims. Whether that claim is accurate is a separate question from the fact that the IRGC has the organizational coherence to continue offensive operations while processing that message. An organization on the verge of military collapse does not have the bandwidth for strategic communications of that nature. Now let's connect this directly to the $200 billion emergency funding request and to the F-35 incident. Because these three things, the IRGC's durability, the American losses, and the funding ask, are one story, not three. The Associated Press confirmed on March 19th that the Pentagon has sought approximately $200 billion in additional funding for the Iran war. According to AP sources, this request had not yet been formally submitted to Congress as of that date. It was already encountering resistance before filing. The New York Times reported on March 20th that Republican lawmakers are resisting a public accounting on Iran. Nearly 3 weeks into an unpopular war, top Republicans have yet to call Trump administration officials to testify. Sources indicate they worry that doing so would expose internal divisions. That is an extraordinary political situation, a $200 billion request, congressional resistance, and the majority party reluctant to hold hearings that would require public answers. Why is the number $200 billion? Because the IRGC's durability is making this conflict far more expensive than the initial operational planning projected. Every additional week of active combat operations burns through munitions at rates that require replenishment. Precision-guided munitions cost between $150,000 and over $1 million per unit, depending on type. Munitions inventory depletion becomes a serious and expensive problem within weeks at this tempo. Add carrier strike group operational costs. The USS Gerald R. Ford was photographed transiting the Suez Canal on March 5, 2026. That ship and its associated strike group cost tens of millions of dollars per day to operate in a high-threat forward deployment. Multiple strike groups appear to be operating in the theater. The daily operational cost of the naval component alone runs into extraordinary numbers. Add the KC-135 replacement cost. KC-135 Stratotanker has a replacement cost in the range of hundreds of millions of dollars today. The aircraft lost represents not just a tragedy in human terms, but a significant equipment loss. It requires replacement to maintain the aerial refueling capacity the entire campaign depends on. And add the F-35 incident. Al Jazeera confirmed on March 20th that a U.S. F-35 aircraft made an emergency landing after a combat mission over Iran. CENTCOM, according to Fox News reporting, issued a statement following those reports. An F-35 undergoing emergency landing procedures raises immediate questions about what happened to that aircraft. If it was damaged, the repair or replacement cost is extraordinary. The F-35 program carries a lifetime cost estimated at over $1.7 trillion. Individual aircraft cost between $80 million and $110 million, depending on variant. And that figure does not include the specialized maintenance and parts costs for a stealth aircraft. The intelligence dimension of this conflict adds another layer of complexity. The New York Times reported that Israeli officials stated the United States was informed about the Israeli strike on South Pars. This is in direct contradiction to President Trump's public statement that the U.S. knew nothing about the attack. These two accounts cannot both be true. Either U.S. officials were briefed and the president was not informed, or U.S. officials were not briefed and Israeli officials are making a false claim. Both possibilities have serious implications for the command and intelligence architecture. The Associated Press reported separately that a former counterterrorism official stated publicly that he was not permitted to share his concerns about the Iran war with President Trump directly. The FBI is reported to be investigating whether that departed official leaked classified information. This means a senior intelligence professional is claiming he was blocked from advising the commander-in-chief, while simultaneously the government is investigating whether he improperly disclosed sensitive information. That is a deeply unusual situation for any active military campaign. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard confirmed publicly that Iran's government remains intact. Despite 3 weeks of intensive airstrikes, the governmental structure of Iran has not collapsed. A retired U.S. general stated that neither the United States nor Israel will succeed in replacing the Iranian regime. These are not fringe opinions. These are assessments from people with direct knowledge of what military campaigns can achieve. The economic consequences of the IRGC's continued capacity are now registering across every financial market. Brent crude oil briefly surpassed $119 per barrel before pulling back. Gold surpassed $4,120 per ounce, according to Bloomberg market data. The Swiss franc reached an 11-year high. Bond markets are pricing in 0 Federal Reserve interest rate cuts for all of 2026. The European Central Bank held rates steady, but explicitly cited the Iran war's costs as a source of uncertainty. The Bank of England held its rate at 3.75%. India's stock market suffered its worst single day since June 2024. South Korean shares triggered automatic circuit breakers as the won approached 1,500 per dollar. These are not abstract financial data points. They are the aggregate judgment of global capital markets about the duration of this conflict. Markets are pricing in an extended confrontation, not a quick resolution. And central banks are all managing an energy shock driven by the IRGC's successful disruption. This is now structurally baked into global supply chains. Qatar's LNG damage is confirmed at 17% of capacity with a 3 to 5 year recovery window. That damage exists whether or not a ceasefire happens tomorrow. The South Pars gas field was struck by Israel. Iran's retaliatory strike on Qatar's Ras Laffan is confirmed. This exchange is what Bloomberg's analysts called the conflict shifting into an energy war. It is a phase that has consequences extending years beyond the military outcome. The New York Times reported on March 20th that the U.S. economy as a whole has proved resilient even as households struggle. The Iran war is following the same pattern. Headline economic numbers may not reflect the pain accumulating at the household level. Energy prices, food costs, and tightening financial conditions are all biting. Mortgage rates have jumped to their highest level since November. Americans are drawing down retirement savings at record rates. Switzerland announced a halt to weapons exports to the United States amid the Iran war. This is a remarkable move from a country historically committed to neutrality. It is a signal of how the international community is beginning to position itself as this conflict extends. Trump called NATO allies cowards over what he described as insufficient support. NATO's response reflects a fundamental reality. European governments are managing extraordinary domestic energy costs driven by this war. The political space for active military support is limited when your citizens are paying surging gas prices. So here is what the evidence shows when you put it together. The IRGC built its war machine specifically to survive this kind of campaign. It operates from dispersed, hardened underground facilities. It maintains decentralized command structures. It has continued to fire missiles 3 weeks into sustained bombardment. It successfully damaged 17% of Qatar's LNG capacity. It forced the deployment of an emergency $200 billion funding request. It contributed to conditions that produced the emergency landing of a U.S. F-35. And it has done all of this while the U.S.-Israeli coalition deals with internal intelligence disputes. None of this means the IRGC is winning in any conventional military sense. The death toll in Iran is over 1,144. Key leaders have been targeted and killed. Infrastructure has been degraded. But it does mean that the original parameters of this campaign have already been exceeded. The $200 billion request is the fiscal evidence of that. The F-35 emergency landing is the operational evidence. The 13 American military deaths are the human evidence. And the IRGC's continued ability to strike targets is the strategic evidence. The question Washington is not yet publicly answering is this: what does success look like now? Whatever the original answer was on February 28th, it has to be recalibrated. Every primary source cited in this video is linked in the description below. Stay informed, stay critical.